I was a soldier in a Russian army. I was conscripted in the summer of 2021. My mother was really worried about me. She really wanted for me to attend a university, but we didn't have any money to pay for it. Plus I never had good grades in school, so getting to university was a problem. I was terrified of the army. Everybody heard about beatings and hazing, much more when you are told you are going to be motor rifleman. After finishing young soldier course, I was assigned to a motor rifle regiment. I'm not going to say a location, but let's just say it was very close to Belarus. In November 2021, the motor rifle regiment that was assigned to was sent to participate in the exercise in Belarus, right by Ukrainian border. Our commanders kept telling us that there will be no war, that this is only an exercise to deter Ukrainians. We were told that NATO is training new Nazi gangs in Ukraine, so later on they can invade Russia and Belarus. Of course it was bunch of nonsense, but everyone believed it. We lived in the tents in the horrifying conditions. When there were high winds, tents would collapse. When there was heavy rain, it would flood everything. We didn't have showers, or any way to clean our clothes. Food was scarce. Towards the end of February we were told we're about to go back to Russia, back to our garrison, but on the night of February 23rd, right after celebrating Armed Forces Day, we were given a bucket of white paint and white armbands. Our commander told us to draw letter Z on our BTR. We departed early in the morning of 24th February, heading into Ukraine. We were driving to the border guard post that was completely demolished by caliber missile strike. All that was left were ruins and burning remains of vehicles belonging to Ukrainian border guards. It felt exciting but scary at the same time. We saw a sign on the road pointing us towards Kiev. We have won yet to see any kind of resistance. We thought we won and this is going to be easy. We drove the whole day, watching Ukrainian civilians flee in the area. I occasionally hearing pop shots. I witnessed the car full of civilians being shot at by a BMP-3, killing everybody inside just because they didn't stop. I didn't think anything of it. It's war, right? We were driving very slowly, trying to look for any signs of Ukrainian armed forces, but there were none. Towards the end of the first day, I'll call him, the vehicles came to halt. I overheard on the radio, the forward unit ran into an ambush. There were a bunch of screaming on the radio and you could hear explosions out in the distance. It didn't take long for artillery to respond. They were blessing entire area for about 2 hours before everything turned quiet. When sun came up we kept moving. We drove by the side where ambush happened. About 15 vehicles had been completely burned down, some of the crews inside. When I saw soldiers pulling burned down remains of their buddies not have burned down vehicles, my heart dropped. It could have been me, could have been any of us, but yet we kept moving. We finally stopped to get refueled. After that we kept moving, until the column came to hold again. Again I heard a firefight out in the distance. Artillery and aviation were trying to take care of the threat, but it kept going all night. With the firefight going out in the distance, everybody still felt very relaxed, like Victor is going to come at any moment. But this time we didn't end up moving. Our commander kept kicking us out of the vehicle, having a patrol the woods near the highway to make sure there were no Ukrainian special forces getting ready to ambush us. There was nobody. We went back to our vehicles, turned on the heater and went to sleep. In the morning we kept on waiting and we kept hearing explosions up ahead. Ukrainians were fighting hard. They weren't going to simply surrender. It went on like that for 3 days, was simply just sit there on the road. Finally we started receiving incoming artillery fire. It was inaccurate at first, but then it started coming closer and closer. Finally the command decided to set up some kind of defense. We formed a semicircle in the wood line by the road. We started digging in. As we were digging in we started receiving more incoming fire. At night a Ukrainian drone destroyed couple of vehicles from 1st Company. This time we could see it. Commander told us that nobody died, but you could hear the screams that slowly faded away. We stayed like that for a couple of days. Eventually, Ukrainians figured out that we had nowhere to move. Every night we begun to receive indirect fire from Ukrainian artillery. And they were getting better and better every day, more accurate and more deadly. We began taking casualties. But for some reason we were still not moving. Finally, we started to move again. This time regiment broke up into battalion tactical groups. As battalion tactical groups begun moving towards Kiev, we broke up into our respective companies and continue movement. We were moving slow. I wish I could say it was deliberate, but it was not. We were trying to move southeast to cut off a Ukrainian brigade, in order to envelop it. But as we found out later, they were doing the same thing. And they were much faster at it. My battalion tactical group ended up trapped, but we didn't know that yet. We just kept moving. First week of March, Ukrainians finally got a good hit on us. It begun with a javelin strike in our first tank in the column. as well as the last vehicle, blocking our entire company. We didn't see any Ukrainian infantry, but we figured they were nearby. As we were blocked, Ukrainian artillery and aviation begun to carpet bomb the portion of a highway we were on. It was so intense that most of us just stayed on a truck hoping it doesn't get hit. Ukrainians were shooting about every 30 minutes, after every barrage we would lose a vehicle. It was terrifying. Eventually we dismounted our trucks and ran into a wood line. From there we watched Ukrainian artillery, finishing off rest of our convoy. Now we were in our own. Our company commander died in the airstrike. We couldn't even locate his body. There were no officers left alive. During last Ukrainian artillery barrage, I dropped my weapon and ran straight into your wood line, and they just kept running and running until I couldn't run anymore. I collapsed from exhaustion, and I realized that none of my platoon mates kept up with me. Now was completely by myself with no food or water. I started walking around, looking for them. I was trying to be quiet because I was afraid there were Ukrainian patrols looking for us. So I kept going deeper and deeper into the woods. If you're from Ukraine, you know that woods around Kiev are very ancient. There's a lot of myths were born there. Some of them were just complete nonsense, but I wasn't thinking about it at the moment. All I could think about was getting back to my unit or what's left of it. I filled up my cantina with some snow, waiting for it to melt so I can drink some water, but I had no food. Well, they say you can survive a month without food, except nobody said it was going to be easy. I will try to get some sleep at night and move during the day. Jacket was completely soaked. I had several liters of water in my boots. I was exhausted and hypothermic. Finally I went so deep inside the woods that I couldn't hear anything, just birds singing. All of a sudden they got warmer, like a lot warmer. All the snow around me seemed like it melted. All of a sudden I noticed some mushrooms, grown by a tree. It was a very strange tree. It was almost like it didn't belong there. It was a bird street growing out in the open field. It was a bit of a strange sight, but I was so hungry I didn't care. I ripped the mushrooms out of the ground and shoved them in my mouth. I found another cluster of mushrooms and I did the same thing. I leaned against the tree trying to relax. I started dozing off. Suddenly something jerked me out of my sleep. When I opened my eyes, there was a lady standing there. She looked like a horror movie character. She had a gray hair that looked like she didn't wash it for weeks. Her clothes was ripped to pieces. She was just standing there, and looking at me. When I took a closer look, I realized that her eyes are completely white, like she was blind for decades. Chills started running up and down my spine. She terrified me. "What do you want, lady?" I asked her. She didn't respond. She just kept looking at me with lifeless eyes. "Who are you and what do you want?" I asked her again, but just like before, she just stood there. Although her eyes were completely white, I could feel her stare. It was penetrating. Suddenly, a feeling of guilt started to overwhelm me. "I'm sorry, lady. I didn't want to come here. They made me do it. Again, you just stood there." I decided to stand up. To my surprise, despite my exhaustion, I was able to quickly get up on my feet. I was trying to look away from her, but I could feel her stare. Out of nowhere I started crying. I don't know why, I just wanted to. Suddenly the lady to the right of where she was standing, she started walking facing her back towards me. For some unknown reason I wanted to follow her really bad. When I watched her walk, I realized that she wasn't really walking, it was more like she was floating. After walking for about 10 minutes, we arrived at some random village that looked like it was abandoned a long time ago, and what I saw there terrified me even more. I saw about 5 or 6 children, standing there looking at me with the same white eyes. What the hell is going on here, I thought. I began weeping. I couldn't stop crying for some reason. Children were dressed in modern clothes covered in dried out blood. They were just standing there and looking at me. I still didn't realize what it was. Old lady stood right next to them. I dropped on my knees and kept crying. Something inside of me was telling me that they meant no harm, but it didn't matter to me. Suddenly, children started to move closer to me. I dropped down on the ground and curled up. They came up to me and were looking right at me, with the same dead look in their eyes. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, please forgive me, I didn't want to come here, I didn't kill anybody, you don't understand, I didn't have any choice," I begged. They started to touch me with their cold hands, was even more terrifying. I could feel their cold little hands. The cold of their hands was penetrating my full jacket. I kept crying and begging, until I couldn't do it anymore and I just stopped, accepting my fate. Suddenly, I heard kids' laughs and screams, like they were playing. I opened my eyes and I saw kids running around. Their eyes looked normal, their clothes looked like they wasn't torn to pieces, they were just playing with each other. The old lady back the whole time, staring at me. The kids started to move away from me, I felt feeling of peace and happiness as I looked at them. They started to disappear in a fog, and that made me cry again. I started crying even more as they kept disappearing. I couldn't stop crying. The only one there was the old lady. I couldn't tell the time anymore. It felt like I've been in this place for decades. The old lady then turned around and started walking towards the fog. She disappeared as well. I lost my conscience. I don't know how long it's been, but I felt somebody waking me up. When I opened my eyes, I saw a Ukrainian soldier pointing his rifle at me. He had blue armbands and blue duct tape on his helmet. "Hey, get up," he told me. For some odd reason I was happy. I told them that I'm a Russian soldier and I got separated from my unit. I wasn't even afraid of him killing me, to be honest. In a few minutes more Ukrainian soldiers showed up. They picked me up and took me to the truck. I officially became prisoner of war. But I'd rather be a prisoner of war than continue in doing what we were doing. I can only hope that this war will end one day, so children can play outside without fear of dying. I am an F-22 pilot stationed in Alaska. Let's just say my story was somewhat famous at the beginning of 2023. I got stationed in Elmendorf Air Force Base in 2021, after my flight training was complete. This was my first duty station, so I was pretty excited about flying. That's the only thing I ever cared about. I wasn't married, and my girlfriend was in medical school in California. She would occasionally visit me or vice versa, but outside of work only thing I could think of was flying my F-22. F-22 is the most advanced aircraft in the entirety of the United States Air Force. It's fast, and is armed to the teeth. And the best part is that you are all by yourself. You don't have a weapons officer like F-18s do. On February 10th, it was my turn to conduct a NORAD air patrol mission. This was an on-call mission, so I just simply slept or played Xbox until alarm goes off. Then myself and my wingman would scramble and get directed to where we need to conduct an intercept. Usually it was nothing out of ordinary, a civilian aircraft whose radio is not working, or an occasional Russian Su-95 messing with us in the air defense identification zone, but nothing more than that. I reported for duty at 0600. I collapsed on the couch not expecting anything to happen. I usually tried staying up. You don't want to jump in your F-22 when you are groggy. I couldn't use my phone, and only thing was there to do is to watch a 2-day-old repeat of a hockey game between Kings and Canucks. Oh well, that's the job. Both myself and my wingman grabbed some coffee, and soon we sat down. The alarm went off. I grabbed my flight gear and ran towards the exit to an airfield. I got on the flight line and started with pre-checks. After completing the checklist, I climbed inside my craft. My aircraft name was Toxic. Subsequently I adopted the same call sign. My wingman nickname was Speedy. As I was climbing into the cockpit, a wave of excitement came over me. I didn't fly for 2 weeks due to some training and medical testing I had to do. But this time it's on. I was pumped, not because I get to intercept, but because I get to fly. I didn't really expect anything serious, but the idea of tearing up the sky was awesome to me. We took off from the airstrip, and I started to getting mission instructions from the air controller, who got them from our NORAD sector. There was an unidentified object descending from southwest from about 40,000 feet headed towards North Pole. It was moving fast, but not as fast as we could catch it. I thought it would be a Russian or Chinese reconnaissance plane or a stupid Chinese balloon again. We made our flight path straight north. Air controller was guiding us towards intercept. Usually once our radar begins to pick up the object, we cut ties and handle it ourselves. But the object was still too far. We both picked up speed trying to intercept over the ocean instead of Alaskan landmass, but we had to change the course because the object picked up speed. We ended up flying towards North Pole, but still sort of in US airspace. Finally, we came within 10 nautical miles of the object. I started looking around, but still couldn't see anything. My radar wasn't getting any hits either. Speedy came on the net and informed me that he has some hits. He was higher than me. His radar could pick stuff up from a higher elevation. Hey dude, he is about 35,000 feet, moving at about 700. He said okay, that's not too bad I thought, but the altitude is pretty high. Once we get eyes on it, INWA's going to make a determination on whether or not to engage. I was fully expecting a Russian aircraft at this point. I climbed up to my wingman altitude to get a good radar hit, and I finally got it, but I still couldn't see it, and finally I was able to make out the target. What the fuck is that thing? Speedy called on the radio. I have no idea, man. I responded. What we saw shocked us both. It was a spherical looking thing, no windows, no wings, no visible propulsion system, just a smooth looking sphere. I didn't know what to do with that. I called air controller and described what I saw. I was hesitant to do so. I didn't want to get kicked out because my command would think that I'm seeing shit. But since Speedy is seen as same thing, it was all good. Air controller said that NORAD instructions were to engage regardless of its intent. As I got closer to the object, my radar started to act out. It was the first time I have seen it do that. The thing obviously didn't like radar rays hitting it. Technically radar jamming is hostile intent, but I couldn't get myself to engage it. I asked for a clarification on rules of engagement from NORAD to win some time, hopefully by the time it would leave US airspace and we would RTB, but NORAD watch officer got on the radio and instructed me to engage immediately. I got directly behind an object and let off 2 Sidewinder missiles. Both of them missed despite me locking on target, which is not possible under normal circumstances. Shit, I thought, what the fuck is this thing? I still had 6 AMRAAM missiles, so I decided to empty my weapons bay completely. I shot all 6 and they all did the same thing, simply dove down when they left my weapons bay. I informed the NORAD watch floor that I have no effects on target. They instructed me to continue engagement. The object just kept flying like nothing bothered it. Then I decided to engage it with a Vulcan, which is my 20mm onboard machine gun for lack of a better word. I let off about 300 rounds, and object finally took a hit. It started dropping down. Oddly enough, it wasn't a fast fall, more like a feather dropped from 30th floor. I circled around it as it was falling. Speedy got lower to escort it down. After about 10 minutes it finally fell. It was almost like it weighed nothing. It didn't even make a splash on the snow. I reported a hit directly to NORAD. The watch officer congratulated me. I heard cheering on the background, but I for some reason felt awful about what I did. For some reason feeling of empathy rolled over me like a tsunami. NORAD instructed us to stay up until we get relieved by 2 F-16 from Air National Guard to keep an eye on this thing. After 30 minutes 2 F-16s arrived on the scene. We were relieved by my air controller. When Speedy and I landed, we were told not to ever speak about this by our security officer. Everybody seemed on the edge when we landed. Squadron commander personally listened to my debrief in the skiff. He told me, good job son, but let's not speak of it again, okay? There some high-ranking people were calling about making any official statements. So it went on. I still fly NORAF missions, but I will never forget the day I had to shoot down an innocent alien aircraft.